As many of you know, Rep. Tlaib is an unbossed and unbought congresswoman, and in her own words, a mother working for justice for all. She is the oldest of 14 children, born and raised in Detroit, and the proud daughter of Palestinian immigrant parents. Rep. Tlaib has never sat on the sidelines and waited for justice to just magically appear. This is one of my favorite stories, and actually, the way I learned about Rep. Tlaib was when large piles of black dust started showing up on the Detroit riverfront, blowing into homes and parks. And the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality told residents, like, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing to see. Don't worry about this." She went and collected samples and got the substance tested herself and exposed the cancer-causing petroleum coke as a threat, and it got removed. So she, as I said, she has never sat and waited for other people to do the right thing. She makes sure it happens. As you all know, Rashida knows that effective advocacy requires an all-out approach, fighting in the community, in the legislature, and in the courts every day against injustice and inequality, so that every single person in this country and people abroad have a chance to thrive. She is not only a history-making congresswoman, but one of the most consistent and principled lawmakers we have in Congress. And despite the many attempts to silence and sideline her, Rep. Tlaib has stood up over and over again to fight to end Israel's genocide, apartheid, and occupation. She recently introduced HRES 876, a new resolution that calls for ending weapons to Israel and prosecuting those committing genocide against Palestinians. And we're so lucky to have her join us today to tell us more about this resolution and her ongoing work in Congress. So without further ado, Rep. Rashida Tlaib.
Thank you so much, Amira. It's always wonderful to be in shared space with my sister, Professor Erakat, Nora, as we all call her. I know her students, but it's really amazing to be with all of you today. I do want to center in, yes, I was born and raised in Detroit, but it's the most beautiful, blackest city in the country. And a lot of people say, how are you the way you are? Well, when you grow up in a city as beautiful as mine and unbought as mine, I just know that even after I got censured, a lot of my seasoned residents were asking what it was. And I remember one of my residents, when I explained to her, it was an attempt to intimidate me and kind of, try to silence my position on ending the genocide in Gaza. She goes, "Wait a minute, no one's allowed to tell you to shut up but us." And so that's the community I come from, in that we push back against an institution like Congress that continues to try to silence my voice and so many in Congress, but really even outside of Congress, and especially on uplifting Palestinian humanity. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for continuing to speak truth in regards to, again, trying to save lives, no matter faith or ethnicity, and trying to, again, say free Palestine. Thank you, Josh, for his incredible partnership, and of course, the IMEU Policy Project. As you all know, today's the 77th anniversary of the signing of the Genocide Convention, which created binding legal obligations on states to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. And I know the professor is going to go take a deep dive, and I've heard her speak about it very passionately, and I've learned so much in hearing, again, why at that moment, that Genocide Convention, the reason is what was to prevent what is happening in Gaza. And unfortunately, they're not enforcing it. And we know the U.S. played a key role in drafting the Genocide Convention, ironically, and it was finally ratified in 1980s and remains a party to, U.S. remains a party to the convention today. Yet now we're witnessing over the past 26 months, watching the United States not just fail to prevent the Israeli government's genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, but actively participate and fund it and enable it. Since the start of the genocide, the United States has provided $21.7 billion in bombs and weapons to the Israeli military. And the White House, Trump and Biden, had announced over again $30 billion of new arms sales to come. Our government continues to send a blank check for these horrific war crimes, not enforcing the Genocide Convention. And again, this is war crimes against Palestinians. and as you all know, working to cement the indefinite colonial rule over a shrinking and gradually ethnically cleansed Gaza through the Trump plan. It's important to know that, the Israeli government's genocide in Gaza has not ended. A lot of people are trying to gaslight the American people and the world that it has. And it will not end until we act. Impunity only enables more of the atrocities that we continue to witness. So that's why it was incredibly important to introduce House Res 876, a resolution recognizing the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, alongside 21 of my Democratic colleagues, which I cannot thank enough, who unapologetically have stood up and said this is a genocide, even as the public continues, the small public voices out there continue to try to intimidate and bully them to stop saying the G word. We know the resolution officially recognizes the Israeli government has committed genocide in Gaza and calls our country to follow its binding legal obligations under the Genocide Convention to use all available means to prevent and punish the genocide. And this includes, and they've done it to other countries, so understand that this is not something new, but this includes an end to weapons and equipment transfers to this genocidal military. It includes an investigation and prosecution of individuals who are complicit or complicit corporations in the United States implicated in the crime of genocide. It also is complying with following the orders of the ICJ in the investigations of the ICC. It also includes targeted lawful sanctions with respect of the government of Israel and individuals and corporations facilitating the commission of the genocide. Now, again, these are not policies that I just made up. And this is important because I've had colleagues call and say, well, why this? I said, it's policy actions that demanded in the resolution are pulled directly. And this is important talking for folks that want to push their member of Congress to support this. The resolution is information in the resolution, and the text in the resolution is pulled directly from the report of the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry, which concluded the Israeli government has committed and is continuing committing a genocide against the Palestinians. The Commission of Inquiry called on all states to take these steps, and includes the United States, which bears significant responsibility. No exception. Now, the perpetrators of this genocide want us to forget and move on. They want to gaslight us that there's a ceasefire, and they want us to look the other way while they continue to kill Palestinians with impunity and call it peace. But I know the American people have seen the truth, and many of them do not share my ethnicity nor my faith. But we have all watched the genocide unfold for over 2 years, and the images, the videos of children burned alive and starved, seen our elected officials gleefully autograph American-made bombs on their way to incinerate a hospital or a refugee camp. We know the polling shows over and over again the supermajority of Democrats. Democrats believe that the Israeli government is committing a genocide in Gaza. And they want to cut off weapons to the Israeli government and support imposing sanctions. Supporting this resolution should not be a radical proposition for any of my colleagues. We know that people in their districts, again, that do not share my faith or ethnicity, are telling them over and over again to end this genocide. Human rights organizations are telling us this is needed. The United Nations is telling us this is needed. And most importantly, Palestinian survivors of this genocide are telling us that this is needed. The types of policies demanded in the resolution helped bring the end of apartheid in South Africa. It was decades-long struggle for justice to end U.S. support for apartheid regime. And I hope this resolution brings us closer to an end, not only to the genocide, but the apartheid regime that continues to oppress the Palestinian people. And again, with gratitude and appreciation to all of you, thank you so much for wanting to talk about this, to be able to organize around this. This is another way to educate and inform the public what our responsibility is as a country in the United States when it comes to, again, being part of the Genocide Convention. With that, I thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you so much for just walking us through the importance of the bill and all of your powerful work. We will circle back to Reb Tlaib during the Q&A, and we have some questions lined up for her. But we will now hear from Professor Nora Erakat, a professor of Africana Studies and Criminal Justice at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She is the author of Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. And in 2023, Nora co-chaired an independent task force on the application of the National Security Memorandum to Israel, a report documenting how U.S. arms to Israel have been used in violation of U.S. and international law, and which was submitted to the White House. This year, she briefed the United Nations twice, including a briefing to the Security Council. She is a frequent commentator in media news, and in 2025, the University of Ghent awarded the Amnesty International Chair in recognition of her contribution to human rights and scholarships. We are incredibly honored to have her here with us today, and I will stop speaking so everyone can hear from the brilliant professor.
Thank you so much, Amira, for that generous introduction. Thank you, Josh, for being the engine to bring us together and sustain the momentum to highlight the need to both punish and prevent genocide. And thank you so much to the Honorable Rashida Tlaib for her tireless fight. We really cannot overestimate the significance of Representative Tlaib's in the U.S. Congress, especially at this time, and the significance of a bill recognizing the genocide of the Palestinian people in the very body that has been a co-perpetrator of this genocide. And it's one that continues a legacy that far precedes this moment, including Representative Tlaib's efforts to recognize the Nakba within this body, which has sought to normalize it. So let me start by saying that I think that at the beginning of the genocide in the fall of 2023, it was somewhat controversial to call this campaign this annihilatory campaign by its name, even though by the seventh day, when Israel had ordered that Palestinians north of the Wadi Gaza line basically be forcibly displaced to the south of it, forcing some 1 million Palestinians south, even though they were not provided safe quarter, and even though many of them were sick and unable to move, that alone triggered many genocide scholars to say that this was a textbook case of genocide, together with the, what 800 legal scholars at the time had said that this is also genocide, and others still at the UN who hadn't caught up, like the various special rapporteurs, but that said that this was worrying. It might have been somewhat controversial then as we pushed to acknowledge this campaign by its name. But at this point, if we're not acknowledging it as genocide, frankly, folks are either deliberately working to normalize it or are just outright lying, and not paying attention, and therefore being incredibly irresponsible. Just to provide an overview, in the aftermath of the Second World War, genocide was proscribed as its own crime. During the Nuremberg trials, it was prosecuted as a crime against humanity, but not as its standalone crime. But in 1948, it becomes its own treaty. And there, the plenipotentiaries who drafted it are stipulated that genocide is comprised of two parts: the specific intent to commit genocide and the specific acts that demonstrate that genocide has been committed. The specific intent is plentiful. In the beginning, it was already obvious when, for example, and this is what the ICJ quoted as well, when President Herzog was quoted as saying that it is not true that Palestinians are innocent, but that all Palestinian civilians are involved, thereby making no distinction between those who might be militarily targeted from the civilian population. They were called human animals. More recently, the calls have been much more grotesque and explicit, going so far as Aharon Haliva, the former Israeli intelligence official, as to say that for every Israeli killed, 50 Palestinians should be killed at least, and it does not matter that they are children. There have been other statements like Moshe Feiglin, also a former official, who says that the entirety of Gaza should be wiped out. They are making explicit and clear that all Palestinians should be targeted based on their identity as Palestinians. Um, this is incredibly significant because Israel has had three main talking points in order to reach Israel and its supporters. So this includes the US as a co-perpetrator, the corporate media establishment, the weapons manufacturers, the tech company CEOs have peddled three primary responses to this. One is to say is that not enough Palestinians have been killed. Another is to say is that the objective of the campaign is not targeting Palestinians, but to target Hamas. And a third is to say that in all cases, Hamas is to be blamed for the civilian death toll because of human shielding. As to number one, that not enough Palestinians have been killed, aside from how repugnant that is, I want to just point to the listeners that only one of the 6 enumerated acts in the Genocide Convention listing specific acts actually refers to mass killings. The other ones refer to the infliction of mental and bodily harm in order to destroy a people. The other one that's incredibly relevant to us is to destroy the means necessary for a people to survive, right? So that you have here, a deflection from the fact that the numbers themselves is what reaches the gravity of genocide, as opposed to the fact that what is being done in order to achieve the destruction of a people. And then take into account that the US Congress in 1982 recognized the massacre of Palestinians in Sabra and Shatila, where 3,000 Palestinians were killed, as a genocide. And so here, even the numerical argument falls flat. Number two, that the objective is not to target Palestinians, but to target Hamas. Again, Israel on its own, its officials, from what they say when they tell us that they want to destroy Gaza, to remove all Palestinians, to take their place, is enough to let us know that that is not true. But second, their acts demonstrate that that is not true. When we have evidence that children have been targeted, and this is a BBC investigation, for example, that showed that of the 300 children that were killed, some 100 and almost 200 of them were shot in the head and in the chest. How do you shoot children in the head and in the chest because there was a Hamas human shield? This was a direct kill. Or the fact that, we have heard the testimony of the soldiers themselves, like Daniel Raab, who says that he shot an unarmed Palestinian boy and then shot his brother, who was trying to retrieve his corpse, who was also unarmed. Again, they are telling us over and over what they are doing. We know that recently CNN revealed that there are mass graves all around the Zakim humanitarian site where starving Palestinians were unarmed and queuing for food. We also know of the massacre of the ambulance drivers, 15 paramedics who were buried with their ambulances. We know of mass graves of Palestinians around the Shifa hospital who were zip-tied beforehand. So it is absolutely obscene for them to continue to say that the Palestinian civilians are not the objective. And this too also undermines the argument that we are to blame Hamas for human shielding. So again, this is to respond to their talking points, and anybody who's using them at this point as talking points. And frankly, I don't even hear them using them anymore. Instead, what they're telling us is that too many kids are watching TikTok. They're basically upset that corporate media, which has been colluding in the genocide to prime people to accept this mass number of death, dehumanization, and suffering of Palestinians, is being circumvented through social media, and that's the problem. And so even here, note that there isn't a rejection of the argument of genocide as much as it's lamenting that we are not okay with genocide when Israel says that it's necessary for its self-defense. What explains this controversy, at least in law? There's two reasons. If there's any controversy left, there's two reasons to explain it. Number one, when the Genocide Convention was drafted, it was specifically drafted by existing and former colonial powers who are absolving themselves of their atrocities and their colonial geographies, spanning from the transatlantic slave trade to the genocide of indigenous peoples in North America, as well as Australia, also including the genocide of the Nama and the Herero people. in Namibia, and so on and so forth. And so here you had a number of these colonial powers who were drafting the Genocide Convention in a way that would not necessarily make them culpable for their ongoing and existing genocidal crimes. The other reason is that we see in ICJ jurisprudence, which develops on the application of genocide, a very narrow application of specific intent that interprets, and this is crude in shorthand, that interprets that genocidal intent can only be demonstrated if it's done for no other reason. And here I would point you to the 2007 decision on Bosnia-Herzegovina versus Serbia, where the ICJ found that all of the atrocious acts committed by Serbia and its proxies against Bosniak Muslims were clear evidence of ethnic cleansing, but not genocide, except for the case of the Srebrenica massacre, where they did find a smoking gun. Now, the other reason is the normalization of the Nakba and the fact that Israel is considered the primary reparation. Israel as a state is considered the primary form of reparation for the survivors of genocide, even though that also belies a history of the settler colonization of Palestine that begins in collusion with imperial powers in the aftermath of the First World War 30 years prior to the establishment of Israel. But it also makes it very difficult then to prosecute Israel, which is considered a beneficiary of those reparations by a people that it is genociding. And the Nakba in this moment is happening at the same time between 1947 and 49 as the Genocide Convention is being drafted. This drafting history reflects the controversies that we're still grappling with today, especially as the powers that are committing genocide, the power that's committing it and its co-perpetrators are both trying to normalize Nakba and trying to normalize genocide. I want to bring this to a close by saying that ultimately this is not a matter of law, that this is a matter of politics. The Biden administration, before it left office in January 2024, recognized the genocide of the Masalit ethnic group in Darfur being committed by the Rapid Support Forces in the Sudan as genocide. And when interrogated as to how they can come to that conclusion without an ICJ decision, as they're demanding of the Palestinians in a final merit proceeding, they basically they said, well, we have enough evidence. We have enough evidence to derive based on what this RSF leaders are saying and what they're doing to say that this is genocidal. When pressed on these questions in one particular press briefing on PBS, the ambassador to war crimes in the Biden administration was asked, well, can't you do the same thing in assessing whether or not there's a genocide against the Palestinians? And she kept squirming and literally deflecting that question to answer, oh, we believe in the two-state solution. And pressed again, she responded and said, we're waiting to see what the ICJ does. Very explicit that this is a political determination and that the undermining of the ICJ is, and the deflection to it is meant to deflect responsibility for it. What we are seeing is Nakba. The leaders of Israel have said as much multiple times. Avi Dichter, November 2023, called it Nakba 2.0. More recently, you might have seen Israel's occupation force chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, say that the yellow line that's been drawn now, which takes some 53 to 58% of the of Gaza, is now the new border for Israel. This is part and parcel of Zionist ambitions for genocidal expansion, which means the removal, the concentration of Palestinians and territorial consolidation in order to take their place. This is quintessentially a settler colonial project we are witnessing in real time, and one in which that in order to normalize it and normalize, I think, what is the cruelest phase of the Nakba that we have all borne witness to for the past 2 years is now being met with outright punishment in the form of sanctions on those who participate in the ICC, in the form of suspension and expulsion for students, in the form of the revocation of tenure for tenured professors, and all sorts of punishment across the United States and in other countries as well. Our duty is to fight for the accountability that the Palestinian survivors and those who were genocided deserve, in order to ensure not only justice for them, but for a future where genocide is not normalized anywhere, not in Palestine, not anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I know that I myself have many questions, and I see our Q&A chat box is lighting up. So I'm really looking forward to get to the Q&A, and we'll hear more from the professor and Reb Tlaib. But it is my honor to introduce our next guest. We're going to hear from Dr. Josh Ruebner. Josh Ruebner is not only IMEU Policy Project's fierce policy director, and I have the honor of working with him every day. He's also an adjunct lecturer in Georgetown University's program on justice and peace, where he teaches the course Justice and Peace in Palestine. He completed his PhD in Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter European Center for Palestine Studies, and his dissertation is entitled A Tragedy of Catastrophic Proportions, the United States and the Palestinian Nakba, 1947 to 1949. He's also the author of Shattered Hopes, Obama's Failure to Broker Israeli-Palestinian Peace and Democracy or Apartheid State. I'm really, really excited to have my colleague round us off with opening remarks, and then we'll get into our Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amira. What I want to do is start by really highlighting the central role that was played by the United States in the construction of the post-World War II international order. It was the Roosevelt and Truman administrations that played such a central role in founding the United Nations. In fact, the founding conference of the United Nations was held in San Francisco. And the UN Charter set forth that all people are deserving of equal rights and of self-determination. Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the committee that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a document that asserted that all people are due freedom, all people should be protected from torture, and all people who leave their homes during time of conflict should be allowed to return home. The United States signed and ratified the Fourth Geneva Convention in 1949. This is an international convention that is supposed to protect civilians during times of war. It prohibits the intentional targeting of civilians. It prohibits the wanton destruction of civilian infrastructure. All of these different international instruments were designed to prevent a recurrence of the horrors of World War II. And it was not just those committed by the fascist powers that were targeted by these international conventions, but those committed by the US and its allies too. The fire bombings of Dresden in Germany and Tokyo in Japan, and of course the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. So there was a recognition in the aftermath of World War II that humanity simply could not allow this type of warfare ever again. And really nothing symbolized that determination more than the adoption on December 9th, 1948 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So as Noura mentioned, not only did the US support the Genocide Convention in the UN, it actually strengthened it by leading the fight in the United Nations to amend Article 6 of the Charter to call for the prosecution of those accused of genocide in international legal tribunals. Ernest Gross, he was the legal advisor of the Department of State at the time, and he was also a representative to the US delegation to the UN. This is what he stated in his speech to the UN on that day. He said that the passage of the Genocide Convention, quote, reflected the determination to ensure that the barbarous crimes which had shocked the conscience of mankind in the preceding years would never again be repeated. And he asserted that this Genocide Convention, quote, once adopted would constitute a milestone in the progress of international law. But despite US leadership and support for the Genocide Convention, as Noura mentioned, the US actually didn't ratify the Genocide Convention until 1988, after Congress passed a law making the crime of genocide a crime under federal domestic law. And ironically, the sponsor of this bill, the Genocide Convention Implementation Act, guess what? Was none other than Senator Joe Biden of Delaware. This is what Joe Biden said on the floor of the Senate when he was advocating for passage of this law to make genocide a federal crime. He said the US has, quote, a responsibility to condemn human rights violations, to protect those who are vulnerable, and to punish any violators. How ironic. Because as president, 35 years later, when Joe Biden had the opportunity to prevent and punish Israel's genocide of Palestinians, he instead chose the opposite. He instead chose to facilitate more than $18 billion in weapons to Israel, chose to veto 4 UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire, which made the United States not only complicit in Israel's genocide, but made us partners in crime as well. So since genocide was defined as a crime in federal law, Congress has actually taken additional steps to further punish genocide. Congress amended the Immigration and Naturalization Act to prohibit the entry to the United States of any person who participates in the crime of genocide. And there's also the Human Rights Enforcement Act of 2009. This law obligates the United States to arrest anyone in the United States who participated in the crime of genocide, whether they're US citizens or foreign nationals. So let's be clear. When New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani promises to arrest the war criminal Netanyahu if he sets foot in New York City, which, by the way, is a step that 2/3 of New York City primary voters support, according to a poll that we ran, know this. Mamdani, by attempting to arrest Netanyahu, is actually upholding the law of the land. But when President Trump hosts the war criminal Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago on December 29th, for the 5th time this year, also know this. Trump is actively breaking US law by allowing Netanyahu into this country and by failing to arrest him. Congress has also taken additional steps to punish specific acts of genocide over the years. Congress has appropriated money to punish genocide committed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, by the government and militias in the Sudan, by the military junta in Myanmar against the Rohingya, and by Russia and Ukraine. So let's be really clear. Israel is neither above nor below the law. The continued complicity of the United States in Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza both undermines the entire post-World War II international order, and it also makes a mockery of the values that we as a country profess. So we can begin to remedy this by having Congress pass Congresswoman Tlaib's HRES 876, recognizing and punishing Israel's genocide. Currently, we have 22 members of Congress co-sponsoring this resolution, including Congresswoman Maxine Dexter of Oregon. And I want to shout her out because on November 20th, she took to the floor of the House in support of this resolution. And she talked about how she visited the Holocaust Museum with her daughter to, quote, reflect on the horrific history of dehumanization and ethnic cleansing that ultimately led the world to create a new term to describe such an unfathomable evil. That word is genocide. Congresswoman Dexter went on to say that, quote, many in this body have been reticent to call out the mass suffering, the ethnic cleansing, and the war crimes taking place in Gaza. I will not willingly continue to be part of that complicity. So let's empower more members of Congress to speak with this courage, to speak with this conviction, to speak with this level of moral clarity. What I'd like everyone to do is to go right now to punishgenocide.org and ask your representative to co-sponsor Congresswoman Tlaib's historic legislation.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I'll make sure to leave some time at the end for all of us to make it a group activity to go through the website. But I see Rep. Talib, you've been busy answering some questions in the Q&A. We really appreciate you. I think I want to take us out of the chat box and make sure that folks get to hear some of your great answers. I've seen a variation of a similar themed question that I want to ask you specifically, and that is, I also hear this often in general from people just discouraged constituents, like, does engaging in email campaigns, calls, office visits, do these things matter? Do they move your colleagues? Will, like, writing this email to my representatives actually move things? And, since we have an insider, would love to hear just also how you feel like, how have things changed inside of the halls of Congress? Do you feel a shift when you go to work?
Yes, especially so you all know, so many of my colleagues are out there during the recent government shutdown, where they're out there trying to talk about the importance of extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits and SNAP. But in the audience, there's somebody saying, I want to talk to you about SNAP, but I also want to talk to you about funding the genocide and why are we still doing that? So it is something that is now part of every town hall. They are now prepping how to answer those questions because we haven't gone away. I know people are fatigued, it's advocacy fatigue, but know that it is working because I never thought that Congresswoman Pengree from Maine would sign up and support our resolution, and she did. And I think it's because you have a number of people running for office now, literally on making sure that we're taking care of people here at home and attacking the fact that we have starvation wages and real small pop and mom pop shops, businesses are not being supported. And how come we always have money for genocide, but nothing, for funding our services here? And so it is also done in a way where it's also uplifting policy humanity, not just around the funding, but the fact that we always have money for wars and bombs and weapons, but when it has to and investing in communities here, there never is any resources. So I know only because, as I joke about, but I think it's important for everybody listening. They come up to me complaining as if I'm in charge of all of you that have been standing up against the genocide. They'll come and sometimes I get text messages and they're like, oh, they're having another protest. And I was like, okay, they're your constituents. Go meet with them, discuss it with them. And I just want you all to know that of course, they think somehow I'm in charge. I'm not. I mean, these are Americans that are not related to me. They're not from my district, but people from different likes and different backgrounds who are showing up in a very authentic, real way of, why are we funding this? Why are we supporting this? And, really calling it out. And it's also really important that it's combined with the fact that many folks don't want their, we always talk about being on bought and not, from different lobby, special interest groups. They don't want to be like, do you work for us or do you work for special interest groups? And why aren't you standing up against something that overwhelmingly in the district is supported, including block the bombs, calling this a genocide, any joint resolution disapprove, stopping the weapon sales, overwhelming support. I think both sides of the aisle in their districts, if they were to poll it, and many won't poll it because they know it will come back overwhelmingly supporting, one, that this is a genocide, and two, that we should stop funding it. So to answer your question, Mira, it is. They really thought we were going to all go away. I think they don't realize it's not only not going away, but it's also just growing. And a colleague, last comment is a colleague in Midwest, had a farmer get up in a rural area of the state. A farmer got up and said, why are we supporting that genocide? Like he just got up and he said that to him. Luckily he was a friendly member and they could answer, but he was also like, wow, if that's happening in rural Wisconsin right now, that's where it happened, then we know that our movement is growing. And as somebody that have learned that the Civil Rights Act didn't, members of Congress didn't wake up and say, that's a really great idea. It's when people marched, they boycotted, they wouldn't leave it alone. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing until we could get it passed.
Absolutely. I know you might have to leave us a little early, so I'm happy to let you go now, but if you have time for one more question, I'd love to ask one more question. Okay, one more. And this, you can give us a short answer, and then I think I'll invite Josh in as well. But I've seen a variation of this, and I know you've answered it in the chat. But people say that, like, there's a common critique in Congress, and some of your colleagues love to say this. I've heard it often of, oh, like, I don't want to do a messaging bill or like a measure without reality. Like, Can you speak a bit more on why HRES 876 is so significant in political terms, even if it's a resolution?
Yeah, and I saw a question in there and I answered it because I think, the resolution gives credibility of the importance of why Block the Bombs and other bills are so critically important. And having our country recognize this as a genocide, Congress who passed this, the bill to recognize, make this a crime, that we are organizing, educating people around it. And I'll tell you, and I'll be honest with all of you, much of this came in response to the fact that now the special interest groups, the pro-genocide groups are on the Hill saying, don't say the G word, stay away from it, walk the other way, are basically, and the professor talked about, they're literally tearing down any kind of truth to what is happening right now. And for us, we need to continue to push back against it because we continue to need to have legislation like Block the Bombs or ending any arms sales, or, we call them joint resolution of disapproval for any weapon sales, that we need to get through the Senate and others and grow that support. But we need to acknowledge that our congressional body needs to recognize what experts across the nation and internationally have recognized this to be a genocide. Because right now, so you all know, they are pushing back and forcing my colleagues to deny, not only, they're not even saying it, but to deny that a genocide is happening, and why it's important to push this public body against that narrative and acknowledge that this is a genocide, and it is definitely something that is, again, against international law. So, we know that these organizing tools and having colleagues at least acknowledge that it's a genocide leads to more support for actual legislation that leads to ending the funding for it.
Absolutely. Thank you so, so much for joining us today and for introducing this bill and for your continued tireless work in a hostile body that you are changing every day. Thank you.
You all inspire me. For everybody that's on, there's over hundreds of people on. Just know that the American people, we're all rising up. And this institution literally needs the agitation and the push from the outside in. And we saw that with the right to organize unions. We saw that with the civil rights movement. We see that now with police brutality and so much more. But our country is addicted to war. We're addicted to, the constantly destruction and death. When we can turn this around. And I feel like in many ways, when we can end this genocide in Gaza, I know that that means us moving our country in a direction that says, okay, are we going to leave children hungry here at home? Are we going to allow what's happening to our immigrant communities by ICE alone? So I just want you all to know this, again, as an organizing tool. Do an event in your community around the Genocide Convention anniversary. Talk about this resolution, but talk about all of it all together. And again, understanding the important role that our country has in ending any form of genocide, not only the Palestinian people, but any in the future. So thank you all so much again for this webinar and convening all of us.
Thank you so much. While Rep. Talib has to leave us, we will still continue Q&A with Josh and Professor Erakat. Since we were just in this conversation about how this is moving and how people in Congress are moving on the bill, I would love to just ask Josh a bit more about the 22 members who joined this bill, why that's so significant. I know you hinted at that with Rep. Dexter joining, and I know Rep. Talib mentioned Rep. Pinegre, but would love to hear just like what that means, and maybe you can share a bit more about Rep. Dexter's journey to and why it's significant that she's co-sponsoring it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to circle back to the question of why, despite this is just being a sense of Congress resolution, it's still nevertheless extremely important. I give a few reasons. Number one, this is something that goes into the congressional record. This is going to be part of the historical record forever, that there were members of Congress who stood up and spoke out against Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people and demanded that the U.S. fulfill its legal obligations. So when we end our support for Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people, when we end our support for Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime over the Palestinian people, historians will look back at this resolution to determine who was on the right side of history and who was not. So it's important from that perspective. It's also important from the perspective of, let's say Congress passes this resolution. This will empower mayors like Zohran Mamdani at the local level to actually say that the US has declared that this is a genocide and it's my legal obligation to arrest Israeli war criminals suspected of participating in genocide. So it's important from that perspective as well. And then the third reason I point out it being important is because we've seen time and again in the course of legislative developments that what starts out as a sense of Congress resolution can then often transfer into meaningful legislation that actually changes the law, right? So it starts out as a declaratory statement and then becomes law in a later bill. So I think that's a potential trajectory that we're seeing now for how this resolution might evolve into something like a comprehensive anti-apartheid sanctions type of bill in the future. You asked why it's significant that Congresswoman Maxine Dexter signed on to this resolution. I'll also note that she also signed on to block the bombs as well. This is someone who AIPAC Super PAC dumped $1 million into her campaign in an attempt to buy this congressional seat. And AIPAC's really regretting the fact that they dumped $1 million into this campaign because Congresswoman Dexter has stood up for human rights, for humanity, for common sense policy that aims to end our culpability and complicity in Israel's genocide. So AIPAC is certainly having buyer's remorse. So the fact that AIPAC thinks that they can buy a seat and have that person be subordinate to their policy demands, that time is over in US history. We're seeing how politicians are increasingly believing that AIPAC is a toxic entity and that they don't want to have anything to do with it or with the pro-Israel agenda. So all of these, I think, are very hopeful signs that the political calculations are changing on Capitol Hill in the direction of supporting Palestinian rights.
Thank you so much. I think an incredibly big testament to all the hard work that people who like folks who have joined this webinar have done in the last 2 years. Like, this is why taking action does matter. It does move people. But before we get into our taking action together at the end of the call, I do have one more question for Professor Erakat. And this is one that I know was addressed in some of the remarks, opening remarks, but I really want to belabor this point because I think it is, if anything, one of the most important things to walk away with on this from this webinar. So I'd like to ask you a question that bridges the legal world with the political debate around that we're seeing, right, in Congress and public discourse. There's this significant hesitation to use the term genocide regarding Gaza. And some lawmakers argue this is, just talking about this word is a distraction. We are merely quibbling over word choice. Like, they're with us. They'll say there are some war crimes, but they don't want to call it a genocide. But then they tell us that we're just arguing over word choice, and that we should, focus on actions and facts on the ground. But, from your expertise in international law, can you explain why this is not just semantics? Specifically, what are the concrete material legal obligations that are triggered for states, including the United States, under international law, like the Genocide Convention, once a situation is recognized as a genocide?
Yeah, no, let me answer this in two parts. Number one, I agree. You can call this by its name. It's called a Nakba, and that's fine. We don't have to quibble. We can call it the Nakba. And so that is part of the work that is being done and the effort made in the production of knowledge, certainly in the work that Palestinian studies scholars have been doing, and also in the realm of law, which is the work of Rabia Aghbarieh, who has been theorizing Nakba as a legal concept, which is distinct in that it represents the usurpation of self-determination together with ethnic cleansing, as opposed to, the destruction of a people, which the Genocide Convention specifies. And so on the first count, yeah, if you think we're quibbling, sure, call it by the name that Palestinians call it by, number one. Number two, As a matter of law, the reason that this is so significant is because crimes against humanity, which include extinction, right? Extinction is a crime against humanity, which is also the reckless and systematic targeting of a civilian population that's committed with knowledge, right? Which is almost the same as genocide, minus one is done merely with knowledge and it's, just a systematic killing of civilians, as opposed to genocide, which is done with specific intent, that was the purpose in order to destroy a people based on their immutable characteristic of race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion, right? So you can see that even in the law, we can get at both. And in fact, if this is a fun fact, I know we're excited about the ICC warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, and we should definitely prosecute them. But the ICC prosecutor charged 3 Hamas leaders who have all been assassinated by Israel already with extinction, but didn't charge the Israeli leaders with extinction. All right. Why then emphasize genocide, knowing that we have different options available? Because unlike crimes against humanity, which can be committed during the course of a legitimate war, genocide is never legitimate. Its purpose makes it illegitimate. And so it doesn't matter why you would be committing it. It's an illegitimate purpose, and therefore you have no right to commit it, and it must be stopped and punished and prevented at all costs. That is the primary distinction, because the former can take place in a legitimate campaign, let's say, what Israel is saying. And it might even Israeli apologists admit that there were war crimes and crimes against humanity, but they would never admit that it's genocide, because for them, they have the right to attack Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza militarily. They have the right, according to them, to impose a siege, which is a form of warfare. They have no such right. No occupying power has the right to use military force against a population that it occupies. This was reaffirmed in the ICJ decision in July 2004, 21 years ago. All instability that stems from the territory that's occupied is attributable to the occupying force. You can't both usurp the sovereignty and the police function of a civilian population and then use military force against them, especially in a context when those peoples have the right to use force in order to end racist regimes, foreign occupation, and alien domination. And so here's why, and in terms of concept, that's one, this is just not legitimate. The campaign to annihilate Palestinians is not legitimate. The other reason that it matters is because there's a duty to prevent genocide. So regardless of all of this deflection, we're going to wait for the ICJ to say so. You don't need to wait if the ICJ said that it was a plausible genocide and Israel needs to do a certain number of things, including, facilitating the unhindered entry of humanitarian aid, including not invading Rafah as its third provisional order stipulated, then all of that, or all of those, are means to prevent genocide, even if the ICJ can't conclude definitively that it is genocide, which it won't do until a merit stage of proceedings. There is a duty to prevent. And there is accountability for individuals, for corporations, for media companies as well. And so here it's the accountability piece. So I want to go back. Josh was responding to a question of this has no teeth, this resolution. Yeah, but you know what? What's at stake right now is how we remember this campaign. Our adversary wants to normalize it as a really bad war, on par with, trying to dismantle ISIS in Syria, in Raqqa, or, the attack, the dismantlement of insurgents in Fallujah, right? They want to frame it as just being as bad as those, and let's compare those numbers. But that's not what it is. Just getting them to admit that bad things happen to Palestinians, we have to remember this and concretize it and remember it as a genocide for the sake of the survivors, for the sake of the future governance in all of the other parts of the world that would love to commit genocide in order to annihilate, their pesky populations that they don't want, Myanmar and the Rohingya, for example, the RSF and the Masalit, for example, the Chinese and the Uyghurs, for example. But it's also necessary for future generations and how they come back and remember this. This is a moment because of genocide that demands the reckoning with Zionism as an ideology. And if we don't recognize it as a genocide and just think, well, Israel went too far, Israel didn't go too far. Israel committed a genocide. And now demands a reckoning that there has to be de-Zionification of its society that believed that it had the right to do so and that demands that it continue to do so. And in fact, the Israeli Knesset has passed laws that have made it punishable for up to 5 years in prison if anybody questions what happens on October 7th, notwithstanding the fact that the state itself has yet to conduct a forensic investigation of what happened on October 7th. And yet for asking, but what happened? Why were there no troops for nearly 6 hours? Why were folks asked to stand down? Why was the Hannibal Doctrine used was used in Beirut? Was it used anywhere else? And if you ask or question, then you can be punished for 5 years in prison in Israel, which is why Israeli society actually thinks, it deserves to do this again and again. So we have to demand that it be recognized by its name in order to demand the justice we all deserve. And in this moment, that means de-Zionification.
I know that all of us could spend a lot more time asking Josh and Professor Erakat many, many more questions, but we want to be respectful of all of your time, and we're so grateful for everyone who came to listen and to learn, and most importantly, the next step, take action, which is please, please, please. We've dropped the link. Go to punishgenocide.org. We have all you have to do is fill out your information. It will populate an email to your member and you hit send. It is so incredibly easy. And so, as much of the work has been done for you on your behalf. If you just open the website right now and let it pop up before you close your laptop or walk away from your computer, please take action and email your member of Congress. Every email matters. Every step that we take towards pushing people to recognizing this genocide for what it is, the better off we are as humans. So, we just are so grateful for every single one of you who came in. And I know that many of you have loved ones, who have friends, who are community members, who also maybe couldn't make it tonight, but will take action. So please forward them the website. Please ask them to write their member of Congress as well, because it really does take all of us to do this work. Thank you all and thank you, Josh and Noura, so much for giving us your time and your expertise today. And of course, thank you, Rep. Tlaib.